My intention here in this session is to share some thoughts and perspectives on the theme of self-compassion and offer one or two short practices as we go through and leave some space for questions and reflections, as this is a kind of co-created space as always. I was invited by Cloud Sangha to talk on this topic, and as soon as I was asked, it was a full body yes, because self-compassion has been such a powerful practice in my life, and I'll share a little bit about my story with regards to that. But just an introduction, if I haven't met you before, my name is Deborah Berryman. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am zooming in from a beautiful autumn day in the UK, this season of transition, which I always love, and I'm trying to become more and more mindful of these transitions in our lives. And so before I jump into the talk, I thought it might be nice if we could just pause together for a moment. And if it's useful, just even closing the eyes for a few breaths and taking a moment to tune in, to come in. Because even arriving here in this moment together, we've just transitioned from something. Maybe for you, if it's first thing in the morning, you're transitioning from sleep, or maybe you're transitioning from a meeting at work, or sorting out the kids, or a conversation with a partner or a work colleague. And rather than skipping over the transition, I want us to really let it be in the foreground. What does it feel like to shift from one state to another, from one place to another, from one role to another? And so as you sense into what's here right now, maybe there's a sense of distraction, like I'm here, but I'm also caught up in what I was just doing. Or maybe there's a readiness, a presence. Sometimes there can be an irritability or confusion as we transition from one state to another, or one role to another. So just giving room to everything, not changing anything, just noticing that, this is what a transition feels like. And then when you're ready, taking a nice slow, deep breath. Even here, we're transitioning from internal back into external. So allow the transition to be intentional. Let it be gentle, let it be loving, let it be at a pace that feels good and right for you right now. So you might feel like stretching or rolling or moving. And I quite like to blink the eyes open, so there's a little adjusting. Yeah. So these transitions, I'm paying more and more attention to them in this stage of my life. I think especially because we're doing so much more online, and the transition we used to have between things has almost disappeared. And so the drive in the car for 10 minutes, or the walk down the corridor, or from even one room to another has sometimes disappeared, where we're jumping from one call to the next. And so for me, that requires for me to get more intentional about how I transition, because it's often what takes up a lot of energy. So thank you for joining in with that. And I wonder if a few words came up, about agitation, or feel restless, or feel settled, and thinking about what you transitioned from right now, and then starting to look around the room who we're sharing the space with today, and just getting curious. I wonder what you were just doing before you jumped on the call. I wonder what you're transitioning from, because we have no idea, right? Curious. And as we look around the room and take each other in, it's not just a square with a face, but a human life, a human being on another part of the world. And oh, you too, you're transitioning too. You were just doing something before we arrived. Yeah. So we're all doing this together in our own unique way. And when we remember that, our shared humanity, I think we somehow know each other before we know each other. And this is what I love most about Cloud Sangha is we drop underneath the roles and the labels, and we just come into each other's humanity. And I think that's so precious and so beautiful, really. Yeah. So really, I want to begin by honoring all of the experience that might be here in terms of self-compassion. I understand that, many of us have been practicing self-compassion for a while. Maybe you've been practicing for many, many years, and it's become really a staple for your self-practice. And for others, maybe self-compassion is a word that we've heard or an idea that we've kind of come to understand, but have many questions around how to actually put this into practice. And if we think about the way that we grew up, whether self-compassion was taught as a skill, or if it was role modeled, whether we saw it in the people around us, or maybe it was the opposite, self-judgment and criticism. And so I just want to really acknowledge all of the mixed experiences that we'll be bringing into this space together, and allow room for all of that. No matter how much experience you've had in this field, we can all deepen our practice, and for sure, repetition is never wasted. For someone like me, I need a lot of repetition. So thinking about the opposite of self-compassion. If I share a little bit of my story into this space and this topic, like so many of us, I grew up in an environment where it was baked in criticism and judgment. My family of origin, my educational system, and just the wider cultural context. And if I reflect back, I believe it was in part an innocent idea that criticism and judgment is the fuel for keeping us safe. Or I think the term that really comes to mind is keeping us in line. That this somehow is a way of growing. This is somehow a way of maturing if we judge ourselves and criticize ourselves, that will be the fuel for growth. And if I think back to my family of origin in that cultural context, this goes back generations, right? My grandparents learned it from their parents. My mother learned it from her mother. It goes on and on. And so as a good human being, what I did was pick up the baton of what I learned, what I saw, what I was taught, and I internalized it. So I grew up with the idea that self-judgment, self-criticism, self-aversion were the materials for me to grow and mature and be successful as a human being. And it created a lot of pain that I wasn't even aware of. In Buddhism, we talk about the second arrow, how there's an attack on the self, which causes more suffering. And it was, years into my mindfulness practice, I was already a mindfulness teacher. I was teaching MBSR, and I went on a mindfulness retreat, an MBSR retreat for teachers. And during this retreat, I arrived, and it was like an 8-day silence, and I had high hopes for this wonderful, spiritually deep experience. And as I arrived, I flew over to Ireland, and I arrived with a back injury. I think something on the flight had happened, and my spine had, kind of plunked out of place. And so I arrived on this retreat in the middle of nowhere with a back injury, and the frustration of turning up to this event with an injury, really I found very, very difficult. So in the first day or two in practice was filled with frustration, was filled with self-judgment, impatience, and this unconscious dialogue, like it shouldn't be like this. I don't want my body to be like this. My body is somehow failing me. There's something wrong here. I'm wrong. And, you know, this is a few years into my meditation practice, but it was there and I was cooking in it. And after, you know, a couple of days of this, there was a practice that my teacher led. And the teacher offered a cue in the practice. And she said, I'd like you to really tune in and see if there's any pain or suffering that's happening in this moment right now. Maybe it's in your body, maybe it's something in the mind. And of course, I think she's secretly talking to me. We always think the teacher is. And she suggested, you know, if there is pain somewhere right now, what would it be like to turn towards that pain with a soft gaze and with a loving kindness? And what would be possible as a way of really attending to that pain, taking care of that suffering? And something in me melted. I turned towards my back pain, this thing that I had been fighting and resisting and attacking in some ways. And all of a sudden, it's like the pain in my back had a voice of a child. And it spoke to me and it said, I'm hurting so much and I don't know what to do. And I'm trying to tell you that there's something wrong here, but I keep getting in trouble for telling you that. I don't know what to do. And it was such a powerful moment. And I started to get gentle tears, you know, this quiet release of truth, you know, that was true. My body was speaking to me and I was attacking rather than listening, rather than tending to. And as I felt the gentleness of my heart melting for this pain and this suffering, the lens widened and I started to become aware of all of the times that I have attacked my body, that I have abused my body verbally, you know, how I have distanced myself from my body as unacceptable. You know, whether that it's too tired or it's not the right shape or it's not behaving in the way that I want it to, you know, and I just cried for all of the times that I've done that. And then I widened the lens even more and I cried for all of the ways that I've attacked myself in any way, you know, thinking the wrong thing, feeling the wrong feeling, making a mistake, all of the ways I have attacked myself, I've judged myself, I've criticized myself, and something really, really changed. And what was interesting about this was during that practice, I could sense and notice that there was a part of me that was suffering, the back pain, and there was a part of me that was attacking, that was also suffering, as a way to try and stop the back pain. It was trying to alleviate the pain, but, you know, well-intended, but poor execution. And then finally, there was a part of me that could be compassionate and hold all of that. And that changed everything. It was a real turning point in my practice and in my life, for sure. And so, as a good student, you know, I'm always have a thirst for knowledge. I went about researching self-compassion on the topic because up until that point, I'd been a very dedicated practitioner of mindfulness, but it's not the same as self-compassion. And certainly back in these days, self-compassion wasn't foregrounded as an aspect of practice. So self-compassion includes mindfulness, but it's not the same. Mindfulness really encourages us to feel and allow for whatever feelings might be present, you know, pain, joy. Whereas self-compassion addresses not only soothing the pain, but recognizing that it's part of the human experience, that we all suffer, that we all have pain, that we all struggle with life sometimes. And so off I went into my research rabbit hole. I'm sure you know what that feels like. And spent years really exploring not just what is self-compassion, but I needed a how-to manual. How do I practice this? Because I hadn't learned it as a skill and I hadn't seen it well role modeled. I'd come across the idea of self-compassion in Buddhism, in the Brahma Viharas. They talk about karuna, which is compassion. And in these Sanskrit and Pali teachings, it's implicit that that compassion is also directed and includes the self. It's implicit. And what we've come to really understand and recognize over the last few decades in our culture is that isn't always the case, is that often we're not included in that circle of compassion. And actually, often we can find it easier to be compassionate towards others than towards ourselves. There was some research done by the Self-Compassion Institute back in 2016. They did a survey and 78% of Americans said they found it easier to offer compassion to other people than to themselves. So, you know, our culture is rife with this practice and habit of self-judgment and self-criticism, which we can see then spills out into the wider context. And so I went on to study with teachers such as Dr. Kristin Neff, Dr. Gabor Mate, Dr. Dick Schwartz, who really started to bring a practical element into understanding what's happening when we practice self-compassion in the brain, the neuroscience of it, and then how do we actually interweave this into our lives on a regular basis so that it becomes a new habit. And of course, my teacher Tara Brach is such a wonderful teacher and living example of how we can weave self-compassion through our day-to-day lives. And, you know, studying with her, practicing with her has been, again, such a rich experience. I'm sure you would have come across her work too, and Jack Cornfield. So this idea of moving away from self-compassion simply as a feeling, right? I thought it was just going to be this feeling that washed over me. And more into understanding self-compassion as a verb. It's a practice. It's a choice of self-love that we get to practice 1,000 times a day. Life is very generous in that way. It allows us, it gives us so many opportunities to practice again and again. Thank God. And so self-compassion, as I went into the reams of studying this topic, it is a very vast topic. And hopefully over the last few weeks, if you did manage to get into some of the community sessions with our wonderful array of teachers, you were able to explore this topic from many different facets and through their lens and their experience, which again, I think is what makes Cloud Sangha so rich and wonderful, is that everybody brings such a slightly different perspective and we just get this more rounded, more wholesome understanding of each topic. So today, the lens that I thought we might look at self-compassion through was this discovering of our compassionate self and recognizing that this can be sitting alongside and living by other parts of ourselves that don't feel self-compassionate, that actually may be judging and criticizing, or maybe on the receiving end of that self-criticism and judgment. So I thought it might be nice to do a little exercise to bring that to the fore so we can each experience it. So if you're happy to, let's come into a seat so that we can practice for about 5-7 minutes or so. And if you feel like you want to adjust the posture so you have that lovely blend of feeling both relaxed and alert, so not too sleepy, not too wakey, that space in between. And for this practice, we'll need to have the hands out in front of us with the palms facing up. And if it feels okay, let the hands be slightly off the lap. So you're actually holding them just above the lap with the palms facing up. It's like you're holding 2 bowls of soup. Yeah, and if for any reason that isn't possible or comfortable, please feel free to relax the hands on the lap. But if you can, that can be really useful. By actually lifting the hands, we're activating both hemispheres of the brain. So it's a useful step. And with the eyes closed, you might want to take a nice, slow, deep grounding breath so you can really arrive inside the body. Feel the seat, the weight, the torso, the feet on the floor. So really here. And then as we pause here with the palms facing up and just lift it away from the legs, I'd like you to bring to mind something that you do regularly, even though you think you shouldn't do it. So it could be a way of relating. Maybe you shout at the kids or partner. Or maybe it's an addictive behavior, using food or the screen. Or maybe it's procrastination, just something that you know you do on a regular basis, even though you think you shouldn't be doing it. And once you've landed on something, let's call that something the forbidden thing. And with the hands facing up, I'd like you to imagine sitting in your left palm, there is a tiny version of a wild animal. And this is the part of you that wants to do the forbidden thing. So if you're grouchy and irritable, it might be a snapping shark. Or if it's procrastination, maybe it's a sleeping bear. Or if you're nervous and pent up, it might be a trembling bunny. And as you envision this, just see it looking at you from the palm of your hand, this weary and wild, let's call it the creature. And as we keep that in the left hand, now bring your attention into the right hand. And in the right hand, picture this small, like 3-inch version of your most socially appropriate self. You know, the one who believes that the forbidden thing is wrong. This part of you is very well socialized, would never do anything that would cause a stir, is, you know, always seem to do the right thing. And we'll call this version of yourself the controller. And now notice how the controller in your right hand is always trying to dictate what the creature in the left hand does. Trying to keep the creature under control, getting it to toe the line. You might see how the creature just wants freedom to be itself, to express itself. And also noticing how much effort the controller uses to try and suppress the creature. You might remember all of the times your controller seemed to be running the show, only to have your creature break loose and do all the things that were forbidden. Maybe that happens nearly every day. And as you observe these two versions of yourself, this creature, this controller, let's just consider this for a moment. Let's consider both of them are good. The creature is just trying to be free, to express itself, and the controller just trying to be socially acceptable. And can you see how tired your creature is of being yelled at by the controller, by being restrained by the controller? And can you see how the controller is just as exhausted, tired of playing this role? So tired. And when you can see this, let's begin offering loving wishes to both the creature and the controller. You might silently offer words of kindness. May you both be well and happy. May you both be free. May you both feel safe and find peace. And once you can genuinely feel compassion for both the creature and the controller, you might ask yourself in this moment, well, who am I? You're not the controller, nor the creature. You're watching both of them with care, with love, meaning them both well. So at this point, you've moved into the self. Sometimes we call this compassionate witness or compassionate self. The you that's holding all of this. And you might sense this compassionate witnessing self as the essence, the core of who you are, the true self. Welcome home. And when you're ready, releasing the hands. And if it feels useful, take a slow, deep breath. And as you take a moment with your eyes closed, just feeling into the residue of that practice and taking a moment to recognize what that was like. Maybe what you appreciated about that practice or even found challenging. And again, let's start to make a slow transition. So if you feel like you want to move the body or stretch or roll in some way, please take your time. In a way to kind of blink the eyes, to gently, slowly come back into the space. So it can be a very interesting practice and exercise. And I chose that example because it seems there's a special slither of pain when we recognize that we're acting out of patterns and habits that cause suffering in the long term, and yet we continue to do them. Right? I don't know if you have this experience, but becoming aware of something doesn't necessarily change it. It is the launch pad for change, but it takes a while, and often there's this period in between where we know we're doing something and we don't want to do it, but we're doing it anyway. And then we have this part of ourselves that is the one that's acting out, and then the part of us that's attacking the one that's acting out. And before we know it, there's a team meeting going on in there. Yeah. So recognizing and allowing space for the different parts of us can be a really powerful practice, because there's often different things happening at the same time. And in that exercise, there was the part of us that was acting out, this behavior, and that part of us is suffering, somehow. That's why it's acting out. And then there's this controller that's attacking the part that's acting out. And, the controller is also suffering. It doesn't really want to be doing that job. And so can we hold both of them in compassion? So just before I move on, I just want to pause and just check in with you guys and see what that exercise was like. Like, I'm really curious to see whether that was challenging or if something interesting or something you really appreciated or learned came up. So let me just take a moment and invite you to come in and share some experience so we can connect a little. Yeah. Yeah, Sue, come on in.
So my creature was actually a very cute little mouse, not very threatening. And my controller I didn't like the controller very much, but I gave them both loving kindness. And the funny thing that made me really laugh was in the end, I had this vision, both of them sitting together on the veranda, having a chat. And that was really nice. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue. Thank you. What a lovely ending. They became friends, or at least they were willing to sit side by side. Yeah, thank you. Maybe one more. Anybody happy to share what was interesting or even challenging? I really like to hear both sides of how an experience might be. Yeah, Raven, come on in.
Okay, there you go. Hi. I think one of the things that came up for me was there was considerable discomfort at one point, and something that you said was very meaningful in that, we often feel that we can be very compassionate toward others, but we reserve ourselves in that. And my family culture, academic culture, everything, it's very similar to what you described. And yet I became a nurse and a psychologist and all of these like caring profession things. So of course I'm compassionate with others. But since I've been doing the self-compassion, I recognize that when I'm not compassionate toward myself, I can only go to some level with compassion for others. And it deepens tremendously, and it alleviates not just the self-judgment, but judgment toward others. I'm much more able to accept and to actually feel that connectedness. So this is the first time I've done this with Cloud Thanga, but it is part of my practice now, and I feel as if it's the core. I have to continue this. Thank you.
Mm, thank you. Thank you for sharing that experience and that wisdom, really, which I'm sure there are people in the room that will also resonate with that. Yeah, difficult. Yeah, there's a few people popping in to really echo this challenge of turning that loving kindness, that compassion, that act of self-love towards ourselves to include us. And I think there are a multitude of reasons why we find it so difficult. Um, One is our culture doesn't really appreciate self-compassion, or it hasn't done. We get it confused with self-pity and self-indulgence. And so there's this kind of stoic, stiff upper lip thing, which can be unhelpful. And, if we weren't the recipients of compassion, we were taught how to empathize with others and to be compassionate with others, but we weren't recipients, then that can be quite a challenge. And I think self-compassion is such a, two simple words, but I think it's such a skill, because when we're practicing self-compassion, there's two components to it. There is giving of self-compassion, and there is receiving. So there's two elements, and sometimes we may be, pretty skilled at giving self-compassion, but we don't know how to receive it. We don't know how to let it in. And the other way around too, maybe we can receive it from others, but we don't know how to give. And so, as Raven was just beautifully touching on there, it is reciprocal. It goes around in cycles, both inside and out in the external world. The more we practice self-compassion, the more I can truly hold someone else in my heart, because I know how to do that. I know how to do that. So yeah, and with that, I kind of wanted to jump into so there was these two parts, right? And you may have found it challenging to offer compassion more to one than the other, which is often the case, or maybe it was both equally. And I think it's really allowing space for the parts of us that don't necessarily on first glance look like they're suffering, but really are tender. They've armored pretty well, and they've learned how to be out in the world, but it's also suffering. And there is a theologian called Paul Tillich. He says, the first duty of love is to listen. The first duty of love is to listen. And I remember the first time I heard that, I wanted to cry. Because it's so true. And this is what we do in Cloud Sangha. Every time we're in a mindfulness friends group or a community session and we're in a breakout room and we're listening, really listening to each other, I think is pure love. Pure love. And if you think about the people in your life that you love and that you're close to, and they were going through something that was really difficult, I have no doubt that you would say to me how much you listen to them, how you're just being present, how you just want to let them say what they need to say, to let them be heard, to let them be felt, to let them know that they're not alone, that you're with them, that they don't have to suffer alone. And we can offer that kind of care, that listening to our friends, but can we listen to ourselves with the same heart? Can we listen to ourselves with the same heart? And so I want to just come into another short practice for 5 minutes, if that's okay. Yeah. So again, adjusting the position. I like to adjust the position. It's kind of like such a gesture that says, okay, I'm going to pay attention to me now. I was listening to you, but now I'm paying attention to me. So you get to be the star of the show. You know, the lead in your own life. Yeah. And then if it feels okay, again, closing the eyes either fully or halfway. So this real sense of I'm coming in to listen. I'm coming in to listen. And so as we come to settle in, finding a way to drop in a little more fully, and seeing if you can let go of any habitual tensions. So nice and soft in the eyes, the face, the jaw. And as we come to settle, I'd like you to bring to mind the two parts that you worked with in the previous session. Maybe it's the creature, the controller, and I'd like you to choose a part that you would like to get to know a little more. And as you do, connecting with your intention to awaken compassion towards this part. And we begin by letting yourself recognize how this part is suffering. It's having a hard time. And seeing how you know it's suffering. You know, what is it that you recognize? Maybe it's the way that they're behaving, or language they're using, or the facial expression. So we're using the practice of rain, we're just recognizing, this part is suffering, and here's how I know. And then as we begin to investigate, let's just have a little curiosity. You know, what is it like being you? With real gentleness, attending more closely to what this part might be experiencing. You might imagine feeling with their heart and viewing the world from their perspective. Maybe you can even sense what they believe about themselves. Maybe they're believing that they're a failure or they're not safe. And you might ask this part, well, what is it that you most need? What is it you most need inwardly? Is it acceptance? Is it safety? Understanding? Love? Maybe to be seen or to be heard? And as you find what this part of you most needs, just allowing this to be sent energetically, this flow of warmth. Imagine that they're getting the love, give them the understanding, I see you, it's okay. Whatever that part needs, offering that loving kindness. Now imagine that this part is receiving. And just watch what happens as you imagine them receiving this love, this understanding, this kindness, this reassurance. And now you might widen the field of awareness now and sense all of the people you can imagine that also struggle with this part that feels like a failure, that doesn't feel safe. And just noticing how your heart is spacious, it can hold this for you, for others who have the same struggle. Feel as if you're breathing in and just letting yourself be touched by this shared humanity. And this desire to be kind to yourself. May we all find peace and safety. Maybe you'll feel loved, understood, seen and heard. Maybe we'll be kind to ourselves in these moments of struggle. As you let the practice go, just feeling into that wider, spacious awareness. And you may feel that part of yourself is still there, but it's being held by something bigger, something more loving. When you're ready, let's take a nice, slow, deep grounding breath. Feeling the seat, the feet, the earth underneath. Allow yourself to be held, to be supported. Once again, let's make this slow and gentle transition. However that feels for you. Just doing what feels right for you. So as we gather back together, I just want to kind of give some light. You might even be noticing the judgments and criticism about how well you practice self-compassion, right? Like, what's wrong with me? I can't do this properly. I don't like, even here, right? Yeah. And if this is a new practice, it can feel very clunky for a while, It feels like we're going against the grain, like I'm doing something very countercultural. And we may come up against lots of resistance. And that resistance can manifest as boredom, irritation, internal eye rolling, all these different aspects, because, there's a resistance to just dropping into something and trying it. So if that's your experience today, it's okay. There's nothing wrong. We're learning a new skill like anything else. Yeah. So, and interesting again. So I asked you to choose a part, and I'm curious for you to just in your own mind notice which part you chose, whether it was the one that you felt a bit more comfortable with, or actually the one that was a bit more challenging, and what it was like to let it have a voice and to really be felt and be seen. And then the practice at the end to both offer some loving kindness, some care, some understanding, but also to receive. And we may have found one aspect of that easier than the other. But I really invite you, I'm aware of time, we've only got a few minutes left. I really invite you to persevere with the practice. If you feel inclined, even if it's difficult, if you feel there's something here, I know there's something here, but there may be a few barriers to work our way through, then I would so encourage you to persevere, because it really can be a life-changing practice. I say that with quite intentional choice of words, life-changing practice. And I would maybe say life-saving. Yeah. So there's a reading I want to share before I close, but I also want to leave some space if anybody has any questions about this practice, either what we did today or just in general about self-compassion, something that might be coming up that would be useful to ask in this setting. You might just want to roll around together as a group. Yeah, Leanne, come on in.
I'm new to this, and I find in the form of flight, obsessing thoughts, worries. And I find it really hard to this piece, this self-compassion. I understand it's changes everything, but I'm really trying to get in touch with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Leanne. Yeah. I can so relate. I can so relate. And I'm sure many people in the room can too. Like, I hear what you're saying. And I'm sure there's something in this, but yeah. So, Leanne, can I ask what happens when you try the practice? So let's even today, when you try to cultivate some understanding and some love towards yourself, what happens in that practice?
So I've listened to the other self-compassion talks, some by Tara, but others through this month. And I get to that part where, you want to mix the mindfulness with self-compassion in order to shift. And I can't seem to really feel self-compassion.
Mm, mm, yeah, yeah. So can I clarify? So you're offering the love, the understanding, the patience, whatever it might be, but you can't feel it. Is that right? Yeah, yeah.
I used all the words that all the teachers use.
Yeah, yeah. And you're like, got nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So really common, really common. So to me, as you're sharing this, I'm thinking, oh, great, she's right on track. She's right on track. Yeah. And something that I found really useful were two things. One is I can feel my intention to offer myself compassion. And that is a great starting point. There is a part of me that wants to offer it, that wants to end my suffering, that wants to offer myself love and understanding. And even though I can't feel it yet, there's something there. And so connecting to that part of you that wants to offer, that keeps showing up, that keeps listening to talks, that keeps giving it a go, really connecting. So that part of me must really love me. That part of me must really want to end my suffering because here I am on another talk on self-compassion. I'm still showing up, right? So there is that. And then the other thing that I've found useful in my practice that might be useful for you and anybody else in the room is if I'm struggling with any practice, self-compassion or forgiveness or metta or whatever it might be, and I can't feel it, I can't cultivate it, I can't give it, I can't receive it, then is to bring compassion to that, which is, wow, I'm really struggling with this right now. And there are lots of people that want to be more compassionate, but they struggle too. How very human of me. How very human of me. And of course, I struggle with this because nobody taught me. I haven't seen it role modeled. And it's a brand new skill that I'm just trying to, it's like if somebody asked me to go off and ski down a slope tomorrow, I wouldn't know what I was doing. So how very human of me that this is difficult. Yeah. And that just softens it because it really passes this idea that I should have nailed this or it should come easily to me. And why would it? Given the context of where most of us are coming from. Yeah, so of course this is going to be challenging, and yet here I am showing up. Yeah, here I am being willing, even if it feels like I'm sitting here and I don't know what I'm doing, I'm still here, right? Yeah, that's love. That's love. Being willing to close your eyes for 5 minutes and listen, that's love. So already we're practicing it, even if it doesn't feel like we are. Yeah. Yeah, and I hope that's a useful start in everybody in the room. I really do.
That really was. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So I want to, honestly, I want to stay here and talk to you for another couple of hours, but I also want to respect your time. And we're at time today. So maybe I love a little hand on the heart and a nice deep breath, which is a real thank you for showing up. And that's for you and everybody in the room. Thank you so much for showing up. Thank you. And I want to close with just a very short reading. This is by a mystic poet called Mark Nepo. I spent a week with Mark last year, and there's something that he shared that really has stuck with me. He says, because the space between what we intend and what we do is often great, we keep beginning again. Because the gap between what we feel and what we say is often surprising, we keep trying and we show up. Because the feel between what we experience and what we understand is so vast, we keep growing. This is pointedly different from deliberately living contrary to what we believe and say. That's deceit and hypocrisy. But most of the time, us humble creatures simply miss the mark. We aim, we mean well, we fall short or wide, or we overreach. But I've come to believe that this is all part of the friction of the inner life of things becoming the outer. And I love that piece because he's talking about our intention. You know, my intention is to offer myself and others compassion, and I fall short every day. But we show up anyway, and we try again. And this is us showing up with the intention to practice self-compassion, and we will fall short every day. Full permission granted. Yeah. So once again, a deep bow and a deep thanks to each and every one of you for showing up today. It's been such a pleasure and a gift to spend this hour with you. I hope it's useful and you continue to journey on through this exploration.